we're in this series. We're 3 weeks in now on this series on the Big Ten, the Ten Commandments in the Old Testament. And I was talking to some people again this morning in the lobby, and total mix of people. It's interesting. All of us as Christians, we all know about the Ten Commandments, but lots of us have no idea what that list of commandments actually is. All right? And so far we've covered the first three. So what's the first one? One of you knew. No other gods before God. What's the second one? Yeah. Oh, okay, good. We're going to get a B at least, hopefully. And what was the one we did last week? Yes, do not take Yahweh's name in vain, right? So no other gods before God, no images of gods or God, and don't take Yahweh's name in vain. Now, commandment number 4 is what we're going to do today. What's commandment number 4? Sabbath. And you guys are kind of obeying it today right now, right? You came to church. Everybody online disobeying. No, maybe they're obeying it even better. I'm just kidding. I love to tweak everybody online. Commandment number 4, keep the Sabbath. Now, this one potentially has huge implications for how we live. Right? I mean, if your kids have a part-time job, there is a high potential that they work shifts from time to time on a Sunday. Is that a sin? Should we be allowing our children to work on a Sunday? Do you ever, this is the age-old question growing up. I bet you lots of you growing up, if you grew up in a Christian home or if you grew up in this area, you were probably absolutely against Sunday shopping because of this command. And you would complain about Sunday shopping while you were at Smitty's having lunch and tipping the waitress. Did any of you ever think about, I remember as a kid, remembering that, yes, we are all against Sunday shopping because we're Christians, and had no problems going through the drive-thru on the way home after church. So, but is that, like, if we're supposed to keep the Sabbath, should we not be going to restaurants on a Sunday? Should we not be working on a Sunday? If it's a sin to work on Sunday, then it's a sin. What about doctors and nurses and police officers and all kinds of jobs like that? Is it okay for them to work on a Sunday? Or maybe we should just be talking about the Sabbath as a Saturday, but none of us obeys that either. So how does this apply to our lives? It potentially has huge implications for our lives. But here's the thing, if it doesn't, so either way we have a problem. If it does apply to our lives still today, we probably need to make radical changes. If it doesn't apply to our lives, what does that say about the Ten Commandments? Many of us as Christians think the Ten Commandments is like the foundation of human morality. So if it does apply, we need to change the way we live. If it doesn't apply, we probably need to change the way we think about the Ten Commandments. And so that's a second question we're going to answer towards the end of this message, is we're going to talk about what should our relationship to the Ten Commandments be, because I think that many of us as Christians have no idea what role this list of 10 is supposed to have in our lives today. All right, but let's just start by reading the 4th commandment about the Sabbath, all right? So here we go, Exodus chapter 20. Remember, there's 2 lists of the 10 commandments in Scripture. There's also one in Deuteronomy 5. And we're going with the Exodus 20 list. They're basically the same, but there are some differences which would raise questions for people who think the 10 Commandments were, directly taken off of the stone tablets of Moses. The fact that there's different wording in the 2 lists raises questions for some people, but they are basically the same. But Exodus 20, verse 8, the 4th commandment. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. By the way, I want you to notice that part of the Sabbath law is that you actually have to work for 6 days. Many of you never thought about that. In fact, by the way, so when my wife Leon and I spent a year, first year of marriage in Korea, I've talked about that before. We were teaching English as a second language to kids. Very fun and stressful all at the same time. But anyway, while we were there, we were going to a church with over 800,000 members. It's the biggest local church the world has ever seen. And in Korea at that time, that was in 2001 to 2002, they had a 6-day work week. And while we were there, the government was considering a law to pull it back to a 5-day work week so that Koreans could get a 2-day weekend. And do you know that our church that we were going to there was praying against that, because that is not Christian to have 2 days off on a weekend, because the law says 6 days you shall labor. Right? So, right there again, there's a whole bunch of Christians who are going, the Ten Commandments is the foundation of morality, and many of us have no intention of obeying this law. Now, some of the guys who overwork, and ladies who overwork, you're maybe a business leader or something, you're just elbowing your spouse right now and going, see, 6 days. But anyway, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. Okay, so that's clear. Sabbath is supposed to be kept holy, seventh day every week, all right? So, but let's get a little more clarity. What does that actually mean? How do we make it holy? How do we keep the Sabbath special? On it you shall not do any work. Neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, actually slave, but NIV makes that a little nicer, nor your animals, so yeah, whoa, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. Okay, so that's the fourth commandment. No working on the Sabbath. So on one hand, that's clear. On the other hand, that is not clear. What's clear is you can't do any work on the Sabbath. What's not clear is what counts as work. All right? Well, as we're going to find out, we stay in the book of Exodus. We'll stay right with the same book where we're getting the Ten Commandments, and it spells out more clearly what this means. Because a lot of Christians just sort of take this, oh yeah, I follow the Sabbath, because we just have this idea of I take a day off or I take a couple of days off from paid work. But this commandment is not just talking about paid work. In fact, most of these people didn't work for pay. All right? It's talking about anything that could potentially be conceived of as work. So, for example, in Exodus 31, you shall kindle no fire throughout your dwellings on the Sabbath day. Now, some of us might go, nice, I don't have a fireplace, good to go. But clearly in ancient times, this is not about just having a nice fire, throwing a log on the fire in a fire pit. What did they use fires for in ancient times? Cooking and heating. This law is literally saying, like, forget just stopping your paid work. The law was no cooking or warming yourself, which means that in cooler times of the year, keeping the Sabbath you could be shivering a lot of the day. Like literally it means like you're not doing anything. Now again, so some Christians think, oh yeah, the Ten Commandments are still in place. Yes, we still have to do the Sabbath. If this still applies to us today, then this means, like forget going out for lunch at a restaurant. Those of you who like to turn on the oven to bake some muffins, bad. I'm serious. This is what the law is. So, and they were very serious. So, by the way, a lot of us now, and by the way, I like this. We're going to get to a rest piece at the end of this message. But a lot of us like to kind of go, oh yeah, I like the Sabbath because we like the idea of a day of rest on the seventh day. But for us, that might mean like kind of just kicking back and having a day that we sort of enjoy, where we kind of treat ourselves. The Sabbath law was not about treating yourself. It was literally about not working. All right? And they were serious about this. So I want to show you a story from Numbers chapter 15. They took this seriously. So Numbers 15, while the Israelites were in the wilderness, a man was found gathering wood on the Sabbath day. So literally in the Hebrew, it's picking up sticks. So the NIV figures out, let's just call it gathering wood, but he's picking up sticks on the Sabbath day. Now, how many of you think this is a deep moral crime? Raise your hand. All right? Not many of us can really work up a lot of feelings of guilt for picking up some wood on the Sabbath day. He's gathering some wood on the Sabbath day. Well, what's going to happen to him? I imagine, he's breaking a law. Slap on the wrist, maybe a small fine. Take a goat from the family if you want to really be serious. Well, what's going to happen here? And the Lord said to Moses, the man must die. Straight to death. Now, this is the same capital punishment. This is the same punishment as murder. Now, I wonder how many of us really think that picking up wood on the Sabbath is as bad as murder? If we really think this law is still for us today, it actually means some changes in the way we feel about morality. Because if this is really what someone who breaks the Sabbath deserves, then if you go to a restaurant on a Sunday, that should haunt you for months. It should haunt you. It should keep you up at night. And by the way, it wasn't even like it was a good, clean death. Like, yeah, just get it over with, lethal injection, chop off his head. The whole assembly must stone him. So this guy is gathering wood. Now, for them, it was a Saturday. He's gathering wood on a Saturday. They go straight to get everybody together, and we're going to stone him to death. All right? Now, do we think, can we even, by the way, I would challenge any Christian who even thinks that in order to be logically consistent, they'll say, well, yeah, this is God's justice. He must have deserved it. Even if we say those words, I don't think any of us can actually make ourselves believe it. I don't think any of us can make ourselves believe that picking up sticks on the Sabbath deserves a stoning. Now you say, well, yeah, but that's what they demanded. So we're going to come back to that in just a moment. But I just want to take a time out. By the way, here's just a quick rabbit trail. Does any crime deserve stoning? Now, a little bit of a trick question. Some of you don't know what to do right now because it's all over the Old Testament. Stoning still exists in a handful of countries today in the world. Mostly it's places where there are extremist, Islamic governments. Extremists, not normal Islamic governments, but extremist ones. And the world rightly condemns the practice of stoning as barbaric. And we as Christians all agree it's a terrible way to kill someone. So you say, well, then how can God, but we have to maintain consistency, because if we're going to complain and say, hey, when they do that in a place like the Sudan, when they stone someone to death, and we say that's a human rights violation, and we should say that, how can we be morally consistent and then say, well, in the Old Testament, God was okay with people being literally stoned to death? Like, get around a guy with the community and smash with rocks until dead. Well, this is another example, and we're just here for a second. We talk about this often here at Crossview, but I think it's important, especially because we have kids here, because what is God like? Accommodation is the theological idea that's been around for many centuries. It's been around for all of church history, that God met the ancient Israelites where they were at. That's why there's other laws that Moses said came from God, like the law for fathers to allow fathers to sell their daughters into slavery. Does anyone think God actually ever approved of that? No. Did God ever approve of Deuteronomy 22, verse 23 to 24, where in God's name they said, well, if you're not sure if she's a victim or not, better kill both? Like, that's horrible. Or the genocide in Numbers 31, or stoning a Sabbath breaker in Numbers 15. The fact of the matter is, this is accommodation. So when you read these kinds of things in Scripture, remember Jesus. Do you think Jesus would ever have stoned a guy for gathering wood? What happened when Jesus was confronted by a woman who was supposed to be stoned under the law in John chapter 8? What did he do? He let her off, he forgave her and let her off scot-free. Never mind not stoning her. This is accommodation. God met the ancient Israelites. They were part of an ancient culture that was barbaric, that thought stoning was okay. God met them there. He didn't just abolish it all at once. They couldn't handle it. And as they walked with him, and he's revealing more and more of himself to them, they come to realize, wait a minute, God is not into this stuff, and never was. He's a loving God. But let's go back to the Sabbath. Should we be obeying the Sabbath today? And I want to show you something that's specific to the Sabbath, but then it's going to open up the whole conversation about the Ten Commandments. Because who was the Sabbath law for? And by extension, who are the Ten Commandments for? Well, we go back to Exodus and Exodus 31. I want you to notice how specific this is. The who. The Israelites are to observe the Sabbath. See, a lot of us as Christians have this idea that the Ten Commandments was Moses went up on a mountain and human beings had no idea the difference between right and wrong, And then God gave Moses a list of laws for all of humankind to understand the difference between right and wrong. But I want you to notice here, Moses says the Israelites, this is very specific. The Israelites are to observe the Sabbath. And why are the Israelites to observe the Sabbath? Celebrating it for the generations to come as a lasting, what is this? Covenant. Now, what's he talking about there with this word covenant? Well, a covenant is a special agreement that binds two parties together. Right? So the covenant we all are most familiar with in our culture is the marriage covenant. So when two people get married, what do? They have a ceremony, they get together, they make promises to each other to be faithful to each other until death do they part. It's a covenant that binds two people together. All right? That's what a covenant is. Now, what covenant is this? Because this obviously, we're not talking about a marriage between two people. We're talking about a covenant. This is the covenant that the whole Old Testament is centered on, which is that God made a very specific binding covenant, kind of like a marriage, with a very specific group of people. Not all people. He made it with a group of people, the nation of ancient Israel. This has a lot of implications. So let's just keep reading here, okay? Verse 17. That's a Sabbath, will be a sign between me, God speaking, and the who? Israelites. Forever, for in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested and he was refreshed. So often covenants, now we do this with the marriage covenant as well. So when we get married in our culture, we put a ring on our left hand, whatever finger, I guess it's the wedding ring finger. So I have a wedding ring on because I've been married to LaDawn because we made a covenant 25 years ago that we were going to stick together. And then as a sign of that covenant, we put on a ring. Now, this is a sign of our covenant. Now, lots of people in our culture do the ring sign thing as a sign of their covenant. So LaDawn and I made certain promises to each other. And as a result of those promises, we have certain responsibilities and obligations to each other. All right? And this ring signifies that. Now, does this signify anything to any of the rest of you, though, other than that I'm married to someone? So I made promises to her, but this doesn't apply to everybody else here. Like, it doesn't apply to you. The promises I made to LaDawn aren't now, oh, you, or you, or you, or you, or whoever, right? I'm not pointing out people specifically. The point is, it's a covenant between me and her. In the same way, the Sabbath was a sign, like a ring, of a very particular covenant between God and Israel. And that is like super important to know about the Ten Commandments, and something that many of us totally miss out on and makes the Old Testament a lot more confusing for us. Because we go through the Old Testament and because we read it. Now remember, when the Old Testament was written, 99% of people couldn't read and there was no printing presses, so nobody had an individual Bible. But because of changes in technology and all sort of stuff, we now all can read, and we have printing presses, we have Bibles, so we read the Bible personally in our devotions. And the one thing about that we always have to keep in mind is the Bible wasn't written for a bunch of people to individually read by themselves in their devotions. It's great to do that, and we should do that. That's wonderful. But we have to remember, when we read the Bible by ourselves, it wasn't written for people to read by themselves. And what happens when we read it as if it's for us personally is that we read all these texts and we think each of these laws is for me, when in fact we're reading about a covenant between a group of people at a certain point in time and God. Now, what are the implications? If that's true of the Sabbath, then are you saying, Kris, that none of us needs to ever take a day off? And second of all, does that mean none of the Ten Commandments apply to us, in which case murder's okay, stealing's okay, adultery's okay? Like, what does it mean? If the Ten Commandments aren't actually for us, they were for a specific covenant, what does that mean today? So we're going to answer both those questions, and let's just figure out what the rest of the Ten Commandments, what is the context of all the 10 commandments. And if the 10 commandments, not just the Sabbath, were specifically for the Israelites, what does that mean for us modern people and for Christians in terms of how we understand right from wrong? Well, if we go to Exodus chapter 19, let me just give you the context. Oh yeah, I forgot to say this. The signs and responsibilities of covenant only apply to the people in that covenant. Okay, so that's the first thing. So Sabbath law does not apply to us today. But now let's go get the context for all the 10 commandments. So Exodus 19, this is the chapter before the 10 commandments in Exodus chapter 20. Moses went up to God. So they're at Mount Sinai. And when he's going to come down from Mount Sinai, he's going to have the 10 commandments, all the other laws. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant," so the laws that Moses is about to get are part of this special covenant that God is making with the nation of ancient Israel. "Then out of all nations," I want you to notice, it's specific. This covenant is not with Babylon or Egypt or modern Christians in Canada. "Then out of all nations, you, specifically, the nation of Israel, will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." When you think of the Old Testament storyline, you can actually think of Mount Sinai in the giving of the law as sort of the wedding between God and Israel. So God rescues Israel out of Egypt, so that's kind of like the birth of the nation. They wander through the desert. By the way, interesting thing, if you look at the few chapters between where they cross the Red Sea and where they make it to Mount Sinai, it's kind of like, some commentaries call it, it's almost like a dating period. When the Israelites screw up in the dating period, nobody dies because they haven't made a covenant yet. Then they make a covenant. Mount Sinai is like the wedding between Israel and God, and after that, people start dying, that's a whole nother. Let's just not go there, okay? We can talk about accommodation again. But anyway, "Then out of all the nations, you will be my treasured possession." All right? So the 10 commandments then were, notice I don't even have the R there anymore. The 10 commandments were the centerpiece of the covenant between God and ancient Israel. And the Sabbath was like the ring that proved to them and to everybody else, we're taken. Yahweh is our God. Right? Now, this is where some Christians get uncomfortable. Okay, the Sabbath, okay. But if the 10 commandments were part of a specific covenant that only applied to ancient Israel, then I guess we're just allowed to murder and steal and cheat and all this sort of stuff. And the answer is absolutely no. See, murder and adultery and lying and stealing were wrong long before the 10 commandments. I've talked about this in sermons before. Long before, in fact, I can go into the Bible. We can go to Genesis chapter 4, right near the beginning of the Bible. I can go to the third page in my ESV translation here. I can go to the third page, and I can find the story of Cain and who? Abel. Which is a long time before the 10 commandments. And what did Cain do to Abel, his brother? He murdered him. Was murder wrong already in Genesis chapter 4? Yeah. Did Cain know that murder was wrong already in Genesis 4, long before the 10 commandments? Yeah. And did God discipline him for murdering his brother long before the 10 commandments? Yeah. And by the way, between Genesis 4 and Exodus 20, the giving of the 10 commandments, there's lots of other examples of murder and cheating and lying and all kinds of sins that were all known to be sin, were all punished as sin long before the 10 commandments. In other words, the 10 commandments is not what makes murder or lying or stealing wrong. Those things have always been wrong. And almost every human society in history, including all of the societies around ancient Israel, had laws against murder and adultery and stealing long before the Ten Commandments came along. So those things are not wrong because the Ten Commandments say they are. They're wrong because they break a deeper moral law that is universal to all of us. The Ten Commandments just happens to overlap with some of those laws. So murder, adultery, stealing, they're not wrong because they break the Ten Commandments. They're wrong and have always been wrong because they break a deeper law that applies to all of us as human beings at all times, in all places. Well, what law is that? And how do we know the difference between right and wrong? Well, we're actually all born with this innately, and Jesus managed to sum it up in one sentence. And as human beings, other than those statistical anomalies like serial killers and things like that, every human being is inborn with a conscience since the beginning of humanity that knows this one thing: do not harm others. Jesus put it into one sentence: so in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. This is Jesus brilliantly summing up everything we need to know about morality into one sentence. Jesus really is a revolutionary. And this is the one that we're all actually innately born with. Every human being knows we're not supposed to harm others. It's the law of love, and God expects us to know this law innately. Now, the moment we apply this law, this universal moral law, the golden rule, to the Old Testament and to the Sabbath law, all the confusion immediately clears up. Because now you don't have to be, as Christians, debating, do we need to obey the Sabbath or not? We just take the Sabbath and we just apply it to this law, this universal moral law. Does going to a restaurant hurt someone else? No. Well, as long as you're not doing it. I don't know how you could do it in such a way that's hurting someone else, but as long as no, then go to a restaurant. Does your kid having a part-time job and pull in some shifts on a Sunday hurt other people or harm other people? No, that's not something we need to worry about. It's part of a specific covenant that God had with specifically the ancient nation of Israel. And we can do this with all the laws in the Old Testament. Just apply them to this law, the law of love, and just see. Does it match up? The Old Testament also says no tattoos. Does it break this law? No. That's part of a specific covenant God had with the ancient nation of Israel. Now, this is where some people now say, well, then are you saying, Kris, that we don't need rest? Like, if you're saying the Sabbath law doesn't apply to us, what Kris is saying is we should just all work 7 days a week and be stressed all the time and never take a break. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the Sabbath law is not the thing we need to give us rest. The Sabbath law was just about no work whatsoever. No cooking, no heating, nothing. And actually, rest isn't just about not working, is it? Rest is not just about not working. It includes regularly putting aside time to get out into nature, for example. Some of you might disagree with that, but this one is actually scientifically proven. So even if you hate it, you should try it. Putting some time aside to get out into nature, have fun, and pursue activities that recharge us. Rest is not just about not working. Rest is about doing things that connect us with joy, that recharge us. And yes, that includes to cease from working. But for some of us, the things that recharge us would have gotten us killed in Old Testament Israel. I know there's a whole bunch of you here today, and I hear this regularly, where you like to mow the lawn. My youngest son cannot understand that. He likes to get paid for mowing the lawn. But some of you, I know, sometimes it's moms with little kids, because mowing the lawn is the only time you can't hear them. It's like, oh. And you can see that they're screaming something at you from inside, and it's like, I don't notice a thing. Some of us, like yard work, puttering in the garden. going for a long bike ride, like things that recharge us. There's lots of things some of us love to do that recharge us, that if you did them in Old Testament Israel, the Sabbath law would have got you stoned, like with rocks. Very important. So just include that part. Sorry. Just to keep that part. All right? So instead of trying to finagle ways that we can still be under the Ten Commandments, we actually just need to be under the golden rule, Jesus' law of love. And yes, we absolutely need a rhythm of rest in our lives. We need daily rhythms of rest. We need weekly rhythms of rest. We need annual rhythms of rest. We need rest. And lots of us need to get better at rest. We don't need to be under the severe Sabbath laws of the Old Testament. Now, we're going to come back to this and just spend a moment kind of meditating on this to end this sermon. But I just want to touch on one other thing, because I talked before about what does this mean about our relationship with the Ten Commandments as Christians? Because some of us as Christians, lots of well-meaning Christians, wonderful, awesome people, and maybe some of you here, for all I know, I don't know. But lots of amazing, well-meaning Christians who care about our society, who care about our schools, have this idea in North America right now, particularly in the United States, but it's in Canada as well, that the Ten Commandments needs to be the foundation of our morality. We should have lists of the Ten Commandments up in our courthouses. We should have lists of the Ten Commandments up in our schools, that the Ten Commandments is how we should run society. So I just want to give you some of my personal thoughts, all right? You take these or you leave these, all right? But here's some of my personal thoughts based on some of the things we've said here today. I don't think, as Christians, we should push. I don't think, right? You can disagree with me. I don't think we should push the Ten Commandments in our society. I don't think we should push them in our courtrooms. I don't think we should push them in our schools. First reason, we don't obey them all. Like, can you imagine? I just showed you the Sabbath law. We don't follow it. Even if you think you follow it because you take a day to kind of chill, I bet you do things that would have got you killed in the Old Testament. Can you imagine putting up a list of laws for your kids on the fridge? 10 things every Duerksen must do. And at least one of them, nobody has any intention of ever doing. Like, that's just not even consistent. None of us has any intention of doing the Sabbath. We certainly don't have intention of doing it on Saturday, which is another thing we could have talked about, which the Old Testament was very clear. It has to be the seventh day. So why would we push this on our society when we as Christians don't even obey them all? And if they weren't for us. Can you imagine if I said, you know what, we should actually, because like I can show you laws from ancient Babylon, I can show you laws from ancient Egypt, I can show you laws from ancient Assyria that also outlaw murder, adultery, stealing, and those kinds of things. Can you imagine if I said we should put up ancient laws, the 10 big Babylonian laws in all of our schools and courts? You say, that's sort of random. Yeah, that is. Secondly, the Ten Commandments were for ancient Israel, as you just said. We actually have one that is for all humanity from the mouth of Jesus. If we're going to put something up from the Bible, rather than putting one up, by the way, and we'll also talk about this later in this series, like the first two laws also don't coexist well with freedom of religion. And I happen to love freedom of religion. I only worship God, I only worship Jesus, and yet I think other religions should have their place in Canada as well. But if we're going to put anything up from the Bible in our schools and courts, I'll tell you which one we should do. The golden rule is actually one that actually applies to all of us. It comes from the mouth of Jesus. Which brings up another thing, and this one I do have no time to develop, but I will at some point in this series, and so I will just tease it. As Christians, the Ten Commandments is not our list. Our list is the Sermon on the Mount. At the beginning of Matthew 5, now I will develop this and defend it later on in this series, but in Matthew chapter 5, verse 1, it says that Jesus went up on a mountain, and then he taught the Sermon on the Mount. Now, have you ever thought, I wonder why Matthew would add that little detail? And I'll tell you why. Commentator after commentator after commentator will explain this to you. Is the reason Matthew has Jesus go up on a mountain to preach the Sermon on the Mount is because Jesus is supposed to be the new Moses. And the Sermon on the Mount is supposed to be the new 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments were for ancient Israel. Jesus goes up on a mountain in Matthew 5, and he gives the Sermon on the Mount. The new Moses gives all of humanity and all of his followers a new list. And if we're going to put any list up, now that one's real long, so let's default back to the golden rule. But if we're going to put any lists up in schools or courthouses, it should be the Sermon on the Mount list. And it includes a whole bunch of stuff like turn the other cheek and love your enemies and all kinds of stuff that some of us don't super like. But that's actually our list as Christians. That one's for us. So those are some of my strongly felt personal opinions. And you don't need to. If I come into someone's house and you have the 10 Commandments up in your entranceway, I do not judge you. I love them. They're great. And we can have fun thinking about all the ways we disobey them. Let's finish now with some reflection. Let's finish with some reflection. Let's finish this with rest. We don't follow the Sabbath. We shouldn't follow the Sabbath, not as the law that was for ancient Israel, but we do need to rest. Some of us are good at it. Some of us are maybe too good at it. Some of us are very bad at it. I don't want anyone leaving this sermon with the idea that rest is not important. Rest is important for many reasons that have nothing to do with the 10 Commandments. So, what recharges you? Do you even know? Do you have a weekly rhythm of rest? A day that stands out from other days that's different? And again, if you're parents of young children, some of this won't make sense for a few years. If your kids are between the ages of 0 and 15, no, just 5, 6. What keeps you from having a rhythm of rest? What's getting in the way of you having a proper weekly rhythm of rest? Why don't we prayerfully take this to God? Why don't you bow your heads with me and close your eyes? And let's take a moment to prayerfully consider rest. Not the law of don't do anything, but the need to actually rest and recharge. Father in heaven, help us to get better at rest. Help us to make time. Help us to make rhythms of rest in our lives. And help us to truly live out the golden rule. What all the law and the prophets were meant to point to. In Jesus' name we pray, and all God's people said,